Hello, I'm R.A. Spratt, and I want to welcome people joining us this week on the Yoto podcast platform. Now, just so you know, most of the bedtime stories I tell here are standalone stories. But over the last year, we have been dipping in and out of the epic story of Odysseus, the hero from ancient Greek mythology. And this week, I'm going to be telling the second last installment of that tale. So if you can jump in right here, that'll be fine. I'm sure you'll pick it all up. But if you did want to go back to the beginning and start from the first episode, you can search back through the episodes. The first episode's called Odysseus, as told by Nanny Piggins, and it dropped on January 8th, 2025. Or you can go back and listen to any of the other episodes. You're going to find fairy tales, myths, legends, and mysteries. I hope you enjoy them all. Now let's get into it. Hello and welcome to Bedtime Stories with me, R.A. Spratt. Okay, well, I've just finished week 4 of Book Week. I just got home from Newcastle and I spent the weekend with my family. And tomorrow I'm flying up to Longreach. And if you don't know where Longreach is, it's in Queensland. And if you don't know where Queensland is, it's a state in the northeastern part of Australia. But Queensland is huge. And if you want to know where Longreach is, it's like if you got Queensland and you picked a spot right in the middle of Queensland. Longreach is sort of close to there. So it's a long way to travel. I'll be traveling all day tomorrow to get up there, taking 3 different flights and spending a couple of days up there at the Somerset Longreach Festival. And then I'll come back, I'll spend about 10 hours at home, and then I'll go back up to Queensland to go to Bundaberg for the Coral Sea Literary Festival. And all of that's going to take about a week, and then I will be back home for a few days. So I don't know where I'm going to record next week's episode, probably in a motel room either in Longreach or Bundaberg. We shall see. Okay, but let's get into today's story. I'm doing the story of St. George today, and the reason I did this was because I was out driving my daughter, the one Tammy is based on, somewhere, and she was asking me about, we had a big fire in town in Bowral during COVID times, and 7 of the businesses were burnt down or burnt so badly that they had to be demolished, which is very bad. And one of the businesses was a bank, and she was like trying to remember which bank it was that had burnt down. And she was like, oh, what was it? Was it the Commonwealth? And I said, oh, no, it was the ANZ. And she's like, is that the one with the dragon? And I was horrified because here in Australia, we have a bank that's called St. George Bank, which is clearly the one with the dragon because of the legend of St. George and the dragon. And then I realized that Tammy did not know the legend of St. George and the dragon, which horrified me that her education had failed her. And I'm responsible for that. I should have told her the story. So I thought, I'm going to tell all of you the story of St. George and the dragon. So I researched it, and that is what today's story is going to be all about. The story of St. George and the dragon. I hope you enjoy it, especially if, like Tammy, you had not heard it before. Okay, so here we go. The true story of St. George as told by Nanny Piggins. Nanny Piggins, do you know anything about the legend of St. George? Asked Derek. As it happens, I do, said Nanny Piggins. Why do you ask? Well, we're studying flags in geography, and we learned that the flag of England is the cross of St. George, said Derek. You know, it's white with a red cross. And I just wondered, who was St. George? That is a good question, said Nanny Piggins, because the reality is he probably wasn't English. But he's the patron saint of England, said Samantha. Yes, but the story about St. George was told about a Turkish knight 100 years before it was told about St. George of England. Now, obviously, I would never accuse another storyteller of making stuff up, but there is a slight chance that travelling soldiers heard the story and changed the lead character so that when they went back home to England, it was a story about their amazing friend. You know how much fun it is to tell impressive stories about your vacations when you go home. So you're saying that the whole story of St. George, the beloved patron saint of England, is made up, said Derek. It's got a dragon in it, said Nanny Piggins. Why is it so hard for you to believe the other parts of the story could be made up too? Oh, you'd better tell us the whole thing, said Michael. All right, I will, said Nanny Piggins, but we'd better make a story-appropriate snack first so we can really get in the mood. So Nanny Piggins whipped up some lardy cakes, and the children chomped on them as they heard the tale. Our story begins in the medieval story days, said Nanny Piggins. What does medieval mean? Asked Michael. For goodness sake, are we stopping for questions already? Well, it's not a good sign when I cannot understand a word in the first sentence, said Michael. I don't want to start off confused. There is nothing wrong with being confused, said Nanny Piggins. Boris is confused all the time, and he gets along just fine. It's true, said Boris. The word medieval comes from Latin, said Nanny Piggins. I can't speak Latin, said Michael. Yes, you can, you just don't know it, said Nanny Piggins. I think if I could speak Latin, I would have noticed, said Michael. Do you know the word medium? Asked Nanny Piggins. Oh, yeah, I'm wearing a medium-sized T-shirt right now, said Michael. There you go. Medium is a Latin word, said Nanny Piggins. It means middle, and avum means age in Latin. So you squish the words medium and avum together, pop an al on the end, and you get medieval, which means from the Middle Ages. So medieval's got nothing to do with people being evil, asked Boris. No, the fact that there were a great deal of evil people in medieval times is just a coincidence, said Nanny Piggins. To be fair, there are a great deal of evil people in most times, said Derek. Anyway, it all happened back in the time of the Crusades, said Nanny Piggins. What were the... started Michael. I'll explain what the Crusades are if you can stop interrupting for 5.5 seconds, said Nanny Piggins. Sorry, Nanny Piggins. You just say so many interesting things, I don't want to miss any of them, said Michael. Nanny Piggins was sufficiently flattered by this flattery to continue. The Crusades were a time when the Christians in Europe decided to go to Jerusalem to liberate the Holy Lands. Huh? Said Michael. Why? Asked Samantha. Well, it's all very complicated and has to do with the history of ancient Rome, the Byzantine Empire, and the Rashidun Caliphate. We don't have time to tell all those stories now because that would take years. Fortunately, we don't need to because what happened with St. George happened on the way to the crusade, before he got to Jerusalem, so we can just set that aside for now. Good, said Boris. I'm confused, but that sounds a whole other level of confusiness that would require a lie down and a honey sandwich to recover from. So, as I was saying, St. George, or George as he was called at the time because he hadn't done anything saintly yet, was travelling across Europe to liberate Jerusalem. Now, England to Jerusalem is a long way, and there were no trains or buses or airplanes back then. So they walked, asked Samantha. Oh, please. These were knights. They were too self-important for walking, said Nanny Piggins. They sat on horses, and the horses walked. The journey took months, but young people do like to travel, so I'm sure they had a lovely time. St. George was most of the way there when he was travelling through Turkey. Now, when you say Turkey, began Boris, I mean Turkey the place, not the bird associated with festive dinners, said Nanny Piggins. Anyway, George was travelling through Turkey when he came to a village, and everyone in the village was weeping. Well, that's not always a bad thing, said Boris. A good weep can make you feel a lot better. Boris knew this because he wept most days. Yes, but this was a very despairing weeping, so George knew something was wrong. Why do you cry, good people? Asked St. George. Oh, because the princess will surely die, said the king. What? Said St. George. Why? Has she got a disease? Has she fallen in a well? No, she will surely die when she is eaten by the horrible dragon, said the king. OK, that makes very little sense. You're going to have to go back and explain from the beginning, said St. George. Many moons ago, an ominous shape appeared in the sky, said the king. The villagers wept even louder at the memory. We knew not what it was. We had never seen a beast so big, shooting through the air. But we had heard tell of such a monster, so we knew that this must be a dragon. Crikey, said St. George. The dragon landed with a big splash in the lake just outside of town, said the king. We were mightily afeard of the dreaded creature. In this kingdom we are but peaceful farm folk. We do not know how to wage war against a great monster, so we sought to appease it. How? Asked St. George. We took the dragon gifts, said the king, the finest objects we could offer. Bushels of wheat, jugs of ale, sacks of turnips. But when we presented them to the dragon, it rejected them all and blew fire in our faces. We realized we must present a greater gift, but the only thing left we have to offer is ourselves. At first we offered the dragon the less useful people in society. exam moderators, parking inspectors, bagpipe players. Each day we tied one such person to a stake outside the dragon's lake and left them there to be eaten. But we have run out of useless people now, so today we have just drawn lots to see who would be the next person to be sacrificed to the dragon." "Oh dear," said St. George. "And the person who drew the shortest lot was my daughter, the princess," said the king, totally breaking down into tears at this point. "We just got back from tying her to the stake by the lake." "Never fear," said St. George. "I am a valiant knight who has travelled all the way from Britain." "Where?" asked the king. "It's a little island off the coast of France," explained St. George. "It will get really important in about 500 years' time." "Oh, I can't wait," said the king. "Anyway, being super brave and heroic," continued St. George, "I shall slay the dragon and rescue your princess." "Oh, wow! If you can do that, we would be ever so grateful," said the king. "We will give you as many turnips as your heart desires." "My heart does not desire turnips," said St. George. "I shall think of another way you can repay me while I'm rescuing her." So St. George set off along the path to the lake to rescue the princess. The path went up over a hill, and when he came over the crest, he saw the princess below, tied to a great big pole. Now, whatever you imagine this princess looks like, I want you to stop imagining that right now. "Why?" asked Derek. "Because whatever you're imagining is wrong," said Nanny Piggins. "All the pictures and storybooks depicting the story of St. George always show the princess wearing 17th century French fashion because that's when the European storybooks were first written down. So she's always depicted wearing a long flowing dress." "Oh yeah, and with a pointy hat," said Michael. "That's right," said Nanny Piggins. "Sometimes she's even blonde, which is ridiculous because remember, this story takes place in Turkey in the 11th century, hundreds of years before French fashion takes off. So I want you to imagine a Turkish princess." "You mean more like someone from 1001 Arabian Nights?" asked Derek. "Well, I'm not an expert on 11th century Turkish fashion, but that would probably be closer to the mark than what you've seen in storybooks." "Okay," said Derek, as he imagined a Turkish princess. "So," continued Nanny Piggins, "St. George spots this beautiful Turkish princess." "How do you know she was beautiful?" asked Samantha. "Men never attempt to slay massive fictional monsters for normal-looking women," said Nanny Piggins. "It's just a sad fact about gender relations." Samantha nodded at the cruelty of this reality. "Never fear, princess," said St. George. "I shall rescue you, for I am St. George, brave crusader from Britain." "From where?" asked the princess. "Britain. It's a small island off the coast of France," said St. George. "Oh, okay. Well, no one else has come along to rescue me, so you'll have to do," said the princess. "When the dragon emerges from its watery depths, I shall slay it by piercing its heart with my mighty lance," explained St. George. "All right, well, tell me when you're going to do that," said the princess. "It sounds kind of gross. I'll close my eyes in the gory bits." "Of course, my lady," said St. George. He rode his horse around in front of her, pulled out his lance, and waited for the dragon to emerge from its lake. He didn't have to wait for long, although the dragon did not emerge from the lake. She appeared from a nearby cave on the banks of the lake. "She?" asked Derek. "Oh yes, didn't I mention that the dragon in this story is a she?" said Nanny Piggins. "How do you know that?" asked Derek. "Well, it just so happens that she was, in fact, a distant relative of mine," said Nanny Piggins. "But she was a dragon, not a pig," said Michael. "Well, that's where the story has been blurred over the passage of time," said Nanny Piggins. "You see, people in that part of Turkey were Muslims who don't eat pork or bacon, so they don't keep pigs. They didn't know what a pig looked like. They knew dragons flew through the air, so when they saw my dear distant cousin Tiffany Piggins shooting through the sky, they assumed she was a dragon." "But pigs don't usually fly," said Derek, "obviously apart from you." "Oh no, the pigs in my family have been doing it for centuries," said Nanny Piggins. "How? Was she blasted out of a cannon?" asked Samantha. "Close, a catapult," said Nanny Piggins, "which is a very nice mode of transport. Much better than a bus. You don't have to sit next to anyone." "Well, surely St. George knew what a pig looked like, if he was from Britain," said Derek. "Well, he should have done," agreed Nanny Piggins, "but knights always wear these heavy metal visors when they're jousting, and it's very hard to see through the tiny slits, so he couldn't quite make out the creature before him. When she was a short distance away, she spoke. Ugh, not another two, said my cousin Tiffany. Prepare to die, foul beast, said St. George. Tiffany looked over her shoulder to see who St. George was talking to. What beast? asked Tiffany. You are the beast, and prepare to be slain by my trusty lance. You shall terrorize the good people of this kingdom no more. Prepare to meet your end. With that, George urged his horse into a gallop and thundered towards Cousin Tiffany. This is ridiculous, said Tiffany. She waited until the horse was a few metres away, then simply walked sideways. The horse was going so fast, and it had so much momentum because it was carrying all the weight of a knight wearing armour, that it couldn't turn and galloped straight into the lake. Hey, cried St. George, turning to yell at Tiffany. That's not how it's done. You're meant to face me and fight with honour. I'm doing no such thing, said Tiffany. I've got a lovely frock on. I don't want to ruin it. George jumped off his horse, drew his sword, and stomped up the bank towards Cousin Tiffany. Then I shall behead you with my trusty blade, said George. You really should think about getting counselling. These violent impulses are not healthy, said Tiffany. George swung his sword, but he was wearing so much armour he couldn't move quickly, and Tiffany easily dodged the blow. You know, I'm tired of you villagers terrorising me like this, said Tiffany. I've a good mind to write an angry letter to the council about it. I'm trying to enjoy a lovely lakeside vacation, and you keep tying people up and leaving them outside my Airbnb. I am prepared to sacrifice myself to save the innocent lives of my people, said the princess. I don't want a human sacrifice, said Tiffany. How can you say that after all the poor people you've consumed already? Asked the princess. Oh, you mean the people you left out here tied to the stake? I didn't eat them, said Tiffany. I untied them and gave them directions to a less crazy town. They were hardly going to go back to your kingdom after you tied them to a stake next to a lake and abandoned them. But why did you reject the offerings of barley, ale and turnips we gave you? Asked the princess, and then attacked us with fire. I don't like barley and turnips, said Tiffany. They're disgusting. I'm on vacation. I'm eating cake every day. And I didn't breathe fire on you. There was a great big fire emerging from your cave, said the princess. Oh, you mean my fire pit, said Tiffany. I got that from Amazon. It was only $99. There's a lot of mosquitoes around here in the evening, so it's nice to have a fire. So you're not tormenting the villagers? Asked St. George. No, they're tormenting me by leaving people tied up in my front yard, said Tiffany. It's not relaxing at all. I've had a tough year, what with all the crusaders tromping back and forth across the countryside. It's very hard to unwind when you keep finding human sacrifices in your garden. Then I shall set the princess free, said St. George. Do what you like, said Tiffany. George cut off the ropes that bound the princess, and the village people rushed down from the hilltop where they'd been watching. You have subdued the dragon, said the king. Ahem, you mean pig, said Tiffany. How can we ever repay you? Asked the king, ignoring Tiffany and kneeling at St. George's feet. Please allow me to give you the finest thing I own, the hand of my daughter in marriage. Are you going to let him call you that? Tiffany asked the princess. You're not something he owns. I have no time for marriage, said St. George. I have sworn a vow to fight in the Crusades. But I will accept payment in exchange for saving your princess. I command everyone in your kingdom to adopt Christianity as your religion forevermore. Oh, said the king, are you sure you wouldn't like my daughter's hand in marriage instead? Okay, this is getting silly, said Tiffany. How about, to thank me for not reporting all of you for your dreadful behaviour, you give me some flour, honey and eggs, and I shall make everyone in the kingdom, including this big nincompoop who says he's a saint, a lovely big cake, and we can all set aside our differences and be brought together by the one thing that unites all people and all the pigs of the world, our shared love of cake. And that is exactly what they did. And so they all lived happily ever after. The end. Time for bed. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed that. I really enjoyed researching it. I learned a lot about St. George that I didn't know before. That's it for now. And until next week, when I don't know quite where I'll be when I'm recording this podcast, goodbye for now. Hello, it's me again. If you enjoyed listening to Bedtime Stories with R.A. Spratt, it would be really helpful if you could like, subscribe, follow, and or review the show on whatever podcast platform you're listening to now. Every little one of those digital affirmations helps, and the bigger this podcast gets, the more I can justify procrastinating from my real job to keep bringing these stories to you. Thank you.